Hey guys, today we're going to be checking out Star Citizen 4.4 using the RTX 5090. We're using the MSI Gaming X Trio version of the card, playing on the latest NVIDIA drivers and pairing with 64 gigabytes of DDR5 as well as a 9800X 3D. Let's hop in. Now, as we jump into the settings here, I will say off rip that this is not going to be one of our normal exhaustive benchmarks where I go in, test a bunch of different resolutions at a bunch of different settings. This game is incredibly finicky to get to work, and I'm just really going to test, max settings here. So 4K, and we are going to be playing at native resolution here. This game actually is a bit unique just in that it's actually not really graphically demanding, is not really where you see the performance kind of, see it start to hit. It's much more so demanding in a way that it's not really fully well optimized. It runs even on DirectX 11. So it's just an older model and it's very CPU intensive. So I actually don't think that it's really going to be GPU full utilization oftentimes anyways, but we are just going to go, we have a 5090 here, so we're just going to go completely maxed out settings. And if you are a returning viewer to this channel for a long time, way back in the day, about a year ago, I guess not that far long ago, but I actually started this channel off as a Star Citizen channel. And I kind of, shifted my attention more towards these benchmarks that I've been doing now. And a big reason of that is because this game is just so difficult to do benchmarks in. So while I'd love to do, a video doing every single resolution and every single setting with a number of different GPUs, I may test out some other GPUs if there's interest for it. But really what I'm interested to see primarily here is just, hey, it's new patch here, Alpha 4.4. How does it run completely maxed out settings on the top of the, top of the line hardware? And really, a big reason why I found it so difficult to do benchmarks or really even record any sort of videos in this game is that the game works for long stretches of time and, works totally fine and behaves great, and then it'll just completely shit itself. And hopefully that doesn't happen today, but I do just want to jump in, show a few different scenes here, some different, loops here. Not going to be able to show everything. There's a lot of different things to check out, a lot of different environments, different planets, gameplay loops. It'd be nearly impossible to check out all of those things. And I really just kind of want to walk through some of our different environments here and see what our performance is like. So to begin with here, this is kind of what you'd call your own personal hangar here. So this is just my space here. Other players can come into it, but it is primarily my own space. And this is where you call up ships and things like that. So if we do just pick any random ship we can pull up here, you can see that you just basically pull it up and it kind of spawns in the hangar. And this is obviously already kind of giving us a bit of jank here, but this is, where you'll be spending some time, not a ton of time, but, you'll kind of orient yourself here, get ready to go off and do whatever you need to do, maybe manage some cargo, things like that. So you can see right around 90 FPS, really kind of strange utilization too. Our GPU utilization is not that high, just about 70%. It is pulling 450 watts though, and using about 10 gigabytes of video memory. Our RAM utilization is really high, so the 64 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM is certainly beneficial in this particular case. And our CPU utilization is also relatively high, sitting at around 70%. So it is pretty stable FPS here, right around 90. Now, at this current moment, there's not a ton going on. You can spawn a lot of different entities and objects in here, and that could obviously affect things. But at least to begin with, this particular area, no major problems. And next up, we are actually playing during one of our events here, where it's a free fly event. So if this game at all interests you and you kind of want to check it out, you actually can jump in and play this game completely for free. If you're not familiar with Star Citizen, it's a totally crowd-funded game, and typically you need a ship package. You kind of have a starter ship, and that comes with access to the game. You can kind of jump in and play around in the the pre-release state that the game is in, which is very, very incomplete right now. Which is another reason why benchmarks like this are kind of silly to do, but I, again, just want to kind of check it out. So part of what is in this event, and now we're kind of in a common area, so we'll see other players kind of running around, and some interesting light coming through. But what this event has is, I'll go ahead and start counting again here. This event does have a showroom where they show a bunch of different ships. It's kind of a poster for it. So it's the IAE, or Intergalactic Aerospace Expo. and they basically showcase a bunch of ships. A bunch of them are free to rent for a few days. You can go and fly them, and that's the primary monetization practice of the game, is selling ships. These are all players that have held backspace and killed themselves to spawn wherever they want to spawn. So obviously a lot of, early access, alpha jank that you'll see in this game that is not super common in some other games. There is a lot of fun to be had in Star Citizen, I won't lie. But for me, I've kind of found that I can have fun with the game for a certain period of time before just the bugs basically just ruin the experience for me, and I just get fed up and lose hours of progress and basically just want to quit and never come back. So that's primarily why my channel is no longer a Star Citizen channel. I'm a gamer in general, and I love PC gaming and playing with different hardware and things like that. So I kind of found my niche in the benchmarking category, but Star Citizen always will have a soft place in my heart, and obviously in my wallet. I've sunk a ton of money into this game that is still in there. But we'll go ahead and make our way over to that expo just to kind of see the performance over there. You can see it's pretty variable here, sitting around 60 FPS. There is also a server FPS that we can pull up in a moment here that, basically the health of the server can also have some impact on your general performance. So when you go into a server that has a lot of entities, a lot of stuff is going on, it's been running for a long time, it's possible that that actual server that you're running on is not performing so well, which will then in turn affect your FPS. So your actual hardware is not necessarily going to be your limiting factor all the time. When it is, it's primarily a CPU heavy game. As you can see, GPU utilization sitting around 50%, CPU around 80%. And now that we are in the world with, a lot of other players, other entities, a lot more stuff going on, you can see our FPS dip into right around 60 FPS. So, and honestly, I don't really think that this would be much different even if we were at 1080p. I'm not going to go in and change resolution settings because this game is super finicky. So changing even a minor setting, it has a high likelihood of causing a crash. So I don't want to do that. But this game does look really beautiful, I will say. It's one of the things that really drew me to the game is there's not really very many games like it that have just such a detailed, simplistic kind of non-art style where, it's this futuristic setting, of course, with spaceships and all these. This is like a gas giant that we're above right now in a cloud city, almost like from Star Wars, something like that. Really beautiful, but the actual tone of the game, the colors, everything, it all kind of looks very naturalistic, which to me is really appealing. Everything's very, very, very detailed. You can interact with each individual object. So, for example, you've seen kind of what we're doing here is in order for us to go to this expo, we don't fast travel there. We don't, fly our ship over there. We go on public transport here and take a shuttle over to this space. So depending on when I went, it's possible that, other players would come onto the shuttle with me. We'd all go together. So kind of has this immersive feeling. A lot of that is, of course, really fun and can result in some pretty dynamic gameplay. But some of those things that kind of make the gameplay so dynamic also kind of make the gameplay break. And you can see just how variable our FPS is. It's bouncing all over the place between 60 FPS, 120 FPS, and it will get even more variable as we do some other things. But let's jump into the showroom, which I actually expect the showroom to be one of our more demanding scenes. So we'll jump in there and see how the game's performing. So now entering the showroom, pretty cool how you can see, they're all physicalized spaces. So our little IAE logo to kind of symbolize the event. And then this is the Perseus, which is the new ship that just came out that's actually flyable now. So these ships is the primary way that the game is monetized. And, they pre-sale these ships while they're making them as concept ships. And then eventually they'll release and you can go in and fly them. So pretty cool. These ships, we'll check out one of our bigger ones later today, but you can see just how massive they are. Have all of these, interior walkable spaces, super cool. And of course, they have this big event to kind of showcase all the ships. And, part of the reason why I'm sure they do this is because this is their primary way of actually making money from the players, is selling these ships to players. Now, the plan at the time of release, and even in, the test server right now, or the persistent universe is what they call it. You can earn all these ships in game, but at least pre-release, their current monetization practice is to actually sell the ships with real money. So obviously, there's differing opinions on whether or not that is really a great thing to be doing, but it's working out well for them. I believe this year they're going to cross the $900 million mark as far as revenue earned for the game. And you know, I do have to say this is an independent studio, and it is pretty cool just to see, you know, this is probably the most ambitious game that I've ever personally followed, and seems to, you know, really just kind of stay true to what they want to do. And there's not a ton of overhead to tell them, okay, well, it's, you know, you guys are having fun, but let's kind of wrap it up and, you know, get our ships kind of made, and let's get this game out so we can actually sell the game. They seem to actually be, you know, spending all the time that they want, which has been a long time. I think we're going on year 12 right now of this game being in development, and you know, it's interesting to see when it will actually come out. But as you can see, now we're in this showroom here, another environment, getting a little bit less, kind of similar to what we're getting on the tram here, right around 70 FPS or so, 1% lower than the 50. Feels like a relatively smooth experience. Now, our GPU utilization does obviously indicate that we are not necessarily pushing our 5090 to its full power, only pulling right around 400 watts, which is kind of on the low end, believe it or not, for a 5090. But, you know, there are other players around here somewhere. But basically, you know, this is one of the more demanding areas. Things like NPCs, stuff like that, that will all obviously impact your performance. So getting around 70, 80 FPS is not too bad. You can see some other players kind of sprinting around here. You can always kind of tell the players because they're the ones that are running full speed, and then the NPCs are kind of just like, you know, meandering around. So yeah, honestly, not too bad performance for the showroom. And this is one of the examples why benchmarking this game or making videos of this game is so difficult. This was just me trying to get back to the hangar to continue on. So we will log back in and try again. All right, so back in our hangar here, you can see our FPS is restored. Going ahead and calling up a ship here. All right, so this is kind of like a mid-sized ship, or probably a ship even more on the smaller end here. This is called the Zeus. So we'll kind of take a quick look around the ship before taking off and running a quick contract, which are basically just like the missions in this game, and just kind of see how the FPS, you know, performs as we kind of go through some different scenes. You can see kind of what I mean by, you know, these ships here. They're all kind of, you know, interactable. They're real like spaces that you have to inhabit. So you can see just climbing in here through the ramp. There's multiple entrances. You kind of walk through the ship. It's really like an inhabitable space. Weapon racks, tons of stuff, kitchen and bathroom, which actually I don't believe those are functioning yet or really have any sort of real purpose, but I could be wrong. I do think like hygiene is going to be something that is going to be a bigger deal later. And then cockpit here. So there are obviously ships that have, you know, smaller interiors, maybe just a cockpit that you enter from the exterior. Other ships have an interior, but they're just not quite as big. And there are ships that have much larger interiors. So there's kind of a mix of a little bit of everything. So this is kind of what, you know, people like to refer to as like a daily driver, kind of a ship that you can kind of come in, do a little bit of everything. So it's kind of a good test point just for, you know, kind of trying to see our FPS. So our hangar here, which is kind of our own persistent little space, we went ahead and opened up the top. So now we are kind of exiting our own personal private sanctuary here and entering into the big bad world, which is probably going to affect our FPS. And you can see that that obviously is. Really what I've found in this game in general is that the closer you are to other players, you know, the closer you are to kind of other stuff going on, that's really where you start to see your FPS kind of dip. So as we are kind of flying out of atmosphere here, and we should be able to kind of set a cruise control here, but as we were kind of flying out of atmosphere here, this is where you'll kind of see some of that FPS problems, as well as when we kind of come into a landing zone like this, you'll see the FPS dip. But when we get out into space, kind of away from everyone, that's where FPS really starts to climb. But what's really cool about this game, and you know, kind of the promise that it is hoping to deliver on, and it you know, it's really just that it's one big, you know, world. It's a big connected world. So unlike, you know, a lot of games like, you know, Starfield, you can just take off in your ship, fly straight out from a planet like this, and it'll take you a while without any sort of, you know, quantum travel or some of the faster travel mechanics that are in the game. But you can just fly straight, and eventually you will break out of atmosphere and be in outer space. So that's kind of, you know, the cool thing and about the game, but also obviously what makes it so CPU demanding. Open world games by nature are a little bit more heavy on the CPU end, and this is as open world as it gets. And so it's really the CPU end that really is kind of going to be our bottleneck primarily here, as well as just the general server stability is also really another huge factor. But does lead, these big interconnected worlds do lead to some pretty beautiful scenes. Like you can see here, the sun that's coming up this planet, it rotates and has day-night cycles, just like you would expect in kind of a real world like this. So as you can see, this would obviously take quite a bit of time, but luckily we do actually have some other methods. So while we are kind of counting our FPS here, let's see if we have our quantum travel available, and I believe there should be a space station pretty close to us if I can locate it, that we can jump to. So this one right here, Seraphim, this is the one that kind of is directly over the planet here and kind of is always orbiting above this main city. So you can see jumping ahead, FPS tanks momentarily down to like right about 11 before kind of stabilizing. We'll go ahead and restart counting. But now that we're a little bit away from the planet, a little bit, more off on our own, we are starting to see that FPS recover quite a bit. Now we are still kind of like around other scenes here, so obviously we're around the space station. There's a planet that we came from with that kind of city down there. There you can see another player's ship, a few other ships there, quite a few actually. You'll see, kind of a lot of entities left at some of these more common areas, but if we did just kind of pick a more abandoned type area, like we can probably pick maybe a orbital marker to jump to. And now we are sitting right above our orbital marker, or OM1. So this is, if I understand this correctly, this is essentially right above the North Pole. So these are a little bit more, isolated places. You can see there is actually looks like some sort of a ship wreckage or something over here, which is not actually super common to see. Some cargo here, some objects, looks like maybe it looks like maybe a ship exploded over here or something like that. Not super common to see, but generally, these areas you'll see much fewer players. So this is where you'll see obviously our FPS really skyrocket. And now that we are not so reliant on that CPU end, we are much more able to kind of get higher performance, and our GPU is now where we kind of start to see some of those things become a bit more important. So it's kind of funny how we are actually seeing a player here, funnily enough. Not that I was really expecting to, but you can see right around 140, 130 FPS here. Some dips, but pretty reliable frame times at this point. So depending on what exactly you're doing in this game, you will see, pretty good performance. When you're entering into like congested areas like cities, spaceports, things like that, that's really where you'll see kind of an FPS hit. A lot of times it does come in a wave, which I'll show momentarily here, but it doesn't usually last too long, and in general it's not really the end of the world. So let's go ahead and just do a simple little mission here. So this is in our hauling category here, so we're just going to deliver 6 SCU, which is kind of the metric for storage here. From August Dunlo Spaceport, from Seraphim, which is that station that we were just at, and then we're going to take it right over back to Orison. All right, so now, and again, I should mention I am kind of restarting my count for my FPS every time we kind of come into a new scene here. So you can see we're kind of coming into this spaceport here, which, stuff like this is really what made me kind of fall in love with Star Citizen. And although I don't really revisit Star Citizen a ton, I do still have a really major soft spot for the game, and I do think that just kind of flying around in a beautiful ship, these beautiful environments, and kind of when the world works, it works and it feels great. But unfortunately, at least at this point, there's just so much of the game that just truly does not work, and is unfortunately it just got to a certain point with me that I kind of decided I would just kind of take a step back until it was in a little bit more of a predictable state. But as you can see, I mean, some of this stuff is just absolutely insanely beautiful and really impressive. So coming into a spaceport here, you can see actually not too bad as far as our performance. I am trying to request a hangar to land in. And let's see, I think they gave me one over here. So basically how this works is we just kind of come to a space station like this, request a hangar, and land and grab our stuff. So we'll go ahead and try to maneuver our ship And I did get so into Star Citizen at a certain point that I had, you know, flight sticks, and I actually still have them, of course. I just don't have them configured or set up right now. But so trying to fly with mouse and keyboard is not too bad, but it's definitely a little bit challenging. So is, you know, while, you know, it's kind of one thing to say, oh, this game is so impressive because you're able to do all this without a loading screen, but kind of hard to say that nowadays, in my opinion, when you know, any amount of you know, it being impressive is pretty much negated by the fact that it just simply doesn't work a lot of the time. Like right now, where it looks like there is like a phantom ship spawning on us that disappears. So obviously, you know, you kind of have to give the game a break at a certain point because, of course, it is, you know, a very ambitious game. But you can see, you know, actually loading in here and landing in the spaceport, able to hold a relatively stable around like 60 FPS. You can see what the card is capable of is probably around, you know, 120, 140, somewhere in that range. So when our FPS does dip this low, there's other limitations, either the server or our particular CPU pairing. But we'll go ahead, complete this mission here, which is just bringing up this cargo, fly it back, and just kind of see if going back to the city is really that bad. And I guess I will just real quickly show this. And to be honest, I don't really know what this video is. It's almost like a throwback to my old videos, but also kind of a benchmark here. Just because, you know, I kind of was considering checking out the new patch, just myself anyways. And then I received a comment, someone wanting me to check it out. I actually don't think they wanted me to check it out on a 5090, but I'm not doing a full benchmark in this game on a bunch of different GPUs. I may do a 1 or 2 lower end GPUs depending on how the interest is for this particular video. But anyways, just figured I would show this here. This is kind of how, you know, the loading of the cargo goes. Kind of one of the cool things, maybe kind of a pain, is that, you know, when you go in and you're doing this mission where you're transporting this stuff, you don't just load in and, you know, get everything loaded onto your ship automatically and fly out, although that's how things used to be when I was playing the game more, you know, when I was more of a Star Citizen player. Everything's kind of physicalized now, where you actually have to manually come in here, use a multi-tool, or, you know, some ships actually have a tractor beam. In fact, actually, I think this ship actually does have a tractor beam. And yeah, this ship actually does have a tractor beam. Cool. So anyways, this is one of the cool things, you know, about the game is just how immersive it is. I guess I should make sure I'm counting FPS here, but, you know, it is just pretty neat how, you know, there is just so much to the game. And it's kind of what makes people, you know, want to spend thousands of dollars on ships, is that, you know, if this game really pulls off what it's seeking out to do, making this big space sim with, you know, a bunch of different combat loops or gameplay loops, and we're just doing a small one here, and even a small version of a small one here in the cargo, you know, kind of version of what we're looking at here. If it does pull it off, you know, there's salvage, there's you know, FPS gameplay, there's, you know, ship combat. There's so many different things that this game is kind of wanting to do. If it really does pull it off, it's going to be something really special. And honestly, I think a big reason that people don't like the game is just that they just don't believe that they're going to pull it off, which honestly is hard to really fault people for, kind of, you know, not having a ton of faith that they'll pull it off when development for the game has been such a roller coaster. So leaving out from the spaceport here, you can see FPS still holding really strong, right around 80. Game looks absolutely phenomenal, of course. And everything seems to be going pretty good. Now, I did mention that there is actually a server FPS, so it is worth kind of checking out here. So if there's a way to kind of enable it here, it's going to be real small, but you may be able to see, and I'll zoom in here. Let's get a good kind of backdrop so you can hopefully see it. But it looks like our server FPS is sitting right around 14 to 15 FPS, which is actually pretty strong. So that is another, you know, component that may be resulting in not only us being able to, you know, play the game and not have any major issues here, but also having, you know, relatively stable performance. All right, and now gonna launch down into AORUS, and this is what I think is going to likely be our biggest test when it comes to our FPS. So you can see right around 120, 130 FPS here as is. And that's kind of just, you know, purely what the card can do in best case scenario, you know, when we're not around anyone. You can see even close to like 150. I think 147 is the highest I saw there. Jumping into a super congested area, and this particular city is even more congested than normal due to the fact that a lot of players are here to check out the ships and get free rentals and all that. So you can see this is really where our FPS begins to take a major hit. We'll go ahead and restart counting. So I think I saw as low as like 13 FPS there. Now, it does recover relatively quickly, so you can see right around 50 FPS. Obviously far off of, our ideal situation, but definitely a more playable space than, like the 10 FPS that we were seeing initially. So just the thing to consider here is that your performance in this game is not necessarily going to be just like, oh, I need a better graphics card. It's much more just, sometimes the game can really only do what the server and your CPU can allow it to do. So 40 gigabytes of RAM being utilized here, 13 gigabytes of video memory currently in utilization. So is obviously incredibly demanding situation here, but all in all, you are still able to jump in and perform. When people say, oh, I can't run Star Citizen, or it's impossible to run, I think that there may be a misconception. You do need a strong CPU, and having a lot of RAM, I have found, actually helps. In fact, when I upgraded from 32 to 64 gigabytes of RAM, that was a major factor in my gameplay performance. But in general, you can certainly still come in here, and even players who are playing on super high-end hardware are not going to be having no issues whatsoever. So there is definitely something to be said for, hey, especially right now when it's free to just jump in and try. If this game at all interests you and you're just have been curious to check it out, I would recommend just jumping in, seeing if the performance is up to your standards, and if it is, then then great, and maybe it's a game that you might want to kind of keep an eye on. But I would caution anyone that watches this video and is not familiar with Star Citizen that when things work, it's a lot of fun, and there is certainly a ton of potential with this game. But when things don't work and when the game crashes and doesn't behave appropriately, it's one of the most frustrating experiences that I've had in games, period. So you kind of have to take the good with the bad. And as you can see now, coming into our hangar here, obviously our FPS is beginning to climb, and I imagine it'll climb even more once we kind of close up and kind of isolate ourselves off here. And now we got all of our cargo here loaded off of the ship, and you can see our FPS now that we are kind of sequestered off in our own little environment here. It has kind of returned to that 100 FPS. Maybe closer to 90 in this case, but pretty similar performance. And to complete this contract, all we gotta do is just lower our cargo and confirm the contract, and that's it. So obviously not a typical benchmark that you would normally see from me, but this is kind of a challenging game to benchmark, just in that there are so many different environments that you can see. There's a lot of different settings. The game crashes all the time. It's very dependent on the particular server you're in and your CPU that you have installed in your system. So it's a really challenging game to benchmark. So this is not at all an in-depth benchmark, more so just a kind of a look at 4.4 with top-end hardware. What kind of general performance can you expect at maxed out 4K settings? The resolution that you're going to be seeing, is not going to cause a major change in your FPS. Maybe in some situations where we were GPU bound, like when we're off in space by ourselves, maybe in those situations you might see slightly different performance depending on the resolution that you're playing at. But in general, this game is heavily reliant on your CPU, and even more so on the server and just how the game is choosing to run on that patch at that particular time. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.